In this video, we will translate some sentences from English into QL, which highlight the importance of the symbolization key. Suppose we just want to translate this sentence. There's an actor who lives in Maryland. We could adopt this symbolization key. Let the universe of discourse be people, and let the predicate fx mean x is an actor who lives in Maryland. We could then translate this sentence as exists x fx. This symbolization key is a little strange because it treats being an actor who lives in Maryland as one predicate. Depending on the sentences or argument that we're translating, though, it could be okay, provided we never need to say anything about actors who don't live in Maryland or people who live in Maryland but aren't actors. Then we don't need to consider them as separate possible properties. The situation is different if we also want to translate this sentence. There is an actor who lives in Maryland, but not all actors live in Maryland. This requires thinking about being an actor and living in Maryland separately. So we need a symbolization key with two predicates. Let the universe of discourse still be people. Let AX be X is an actor, and let MX be X lives in Maryland. This sentence has the familiar this but that pattern that we saw a lot in SL. And we know we can translate that with a conjunction, an and. So we want to say there's an actor who lives in Maryland, and not all actors live in Maryland. Looking at the left-hand side of that, it's a pattern we've become familiar with in QL. Some A's are M's. We translate that as exists X, AX, and MX. The right-hand side, not all actors live in Maryland, is also a pattern we've seen before. Not all A's are M's. Recall that there are two ways to translate that pattern. We can do it as not for all X, AX, arrow MX, or as exists X, AX, and not MX. Because there's two ways to translate the right-hand side, we have two equivalent translations. And if we want to translate both sentences, then we can translate both of them using this second symbolization key. Going back to the first sentence, it becomes exists X, AX, and MX. There are indefinitely many sentences we could translate this way, and depending on what else we want to translate, this might be enough. However, consider this sentence. Carl lives somewhere. We don't want to make a new predicate for lives somewhere, because in QL, predicates are separate and atomic. If we had a predicate for lives somewhere and another for lives in Maryland, QL would see no connection between them. But of course, in English, living in Maryland is living somewhere. So what we'll do is we'll have a two-place predicate, LXY, X lives in Y. And that means if we're translating these three sentences, including this one about Carl living somewhere, we're going to need the more complicated symbolization key. We can have AX be X is an actor, just like we did before. We can have LXY mean X lives in Y. And we can have two constants. Little c can be Carl, and little m can be Maryland. What about the universe of discourse? Well, because we have a constant for Carl, our universe of discourse has to include Carl. And because we have a constant for Maryland, the universe of discourse must include Maryland. So we'll make the universe of discourse be people and places. For reasons we'll see in a minute, we want to be able to distinguish the people from the places. So we'll also add two extra predicates. Let HX mean X is a human, and let PX mean X is a place. We'll use this symbolization key for the rest of the video. If you look at our two sentences from earlier, we can translate them using this symbolization key, and they look similar. There is an actor who lives in Maryland becomes exists X, AX, and LXM. There's an actor who lives in Maryland, but not all actors live in Maryland. Well, we get two translations again. But what about our third sentence? Carl lives somewhere. It might be tempting to translate it as exists X, LCX. That says there exists X and Carl lives in X. However, that would be incorrect. Remember that the existential quantifier means that there's something in the universe of discourse that has a certain feature. So this translation means, strangely, that there's a person or place where Carl lives. Obviously, the English word somewhere specifically means a place. We can make that explicit by paraphrasing the initial sentence as, there is a place where Carl lives. Now it starts to look like a familiar pattern. There's a P, which is C. Translating that using our symbolization key, there exists X, PX, and LCX. Now consider this sentence. Everybody lives somewhere. Everybody means all of the people, not all of the people and places. So instead of all actors, we need to make that all of the people explicit. We have the predicate HX to pick out the humans. So the sentence becomes, for all X, arrow, X lives somewhere. I've deliberately left the last part in pseudo-English. And you should feel free to do this when working through problems. If we think about the little subformula, X lives somewhere, it has the same structure as the sentence we translated earlier. Carl lives somewhere. Except instead of being about little c, it's about little x. The only wrinkle is that we can't use exists X as somewhere because we're already talking about X living somewhere. So we need to pick a different variable for the quantifier. We can translate the subformula as exists Y, Py, and Lxy. We can plug that in to the formula we had earlier. Putting that together, we get this sentence. For all X, Hx, arrow, exists Y, Py, and Lyx. It's important when working with a sentence like this to remember that you don't have to write it down all at once. Recognize what the main logical operator is going in and translate it in pieces. Notice that with this translation, we ended up with multiple quantifiers, but we didn't put them in all at once. We put them in as we needed them. We'll see more examples like that in the next video.